We always love hearing from you and what's got you thinking. And recently, one thing you've brought to our attention is this flavonoid called Fisetin.
Fisetin, yeah. It's got kind of a mythical ring to it, doesn't it?
It does.
But it's a real thing, and you can find it naturally in a bunch of different fruits and veggies.
Okay.
And a lot of the excitement around Fisetin is about its potential to target something called senescent cells.
Okay. So
Basically, these are cells in your body that have just gotten old and worn out.
senescent cells?
Yeah, think of them kind of like cells that have aged and they've stopped dividing, so they're not actually dead.
Right.
But they can release all these inflammatory substances and enzymes that can actually harm the healthy tissues around them.
So they're not just sitting there doing nothing.
Right, they're kind of causing trouble.
Yeah.
And the scientific thinking is that this buildup of these senescent cells is part of what contributes to a lot of those age-related issues we see,
Okay.
and the general decline in how well our tissues function as we get older.
So getting rid of them sounds like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right?
Right.
If we could clear them out, maybe we could actually, keep things running smoother for longer.
So where does Fisetin fit into all of this?
Fisetin is part of a group of compounds that scientists call senolytics, and these are molecules that can actually target and kill those senescent cells selectively.
So they're not just going after any cell in the body.
Right, it's like a targeted mission.
Okay.
And there's early research that suggests that Fisetin can actually do this.
And this isn't just something happening in a petri dish, right? I was reading about some studies in mice.
Yeah, you're thinking about that study from 2018, I bet.
Hey.
That one was really a key piece of evidence that got people excited about Fisetin.
Okay.
They gave Fisetin to these mice, and they actually saw that their lifespans were extended.
Wow.
And that the function of some of their tissues improved.
So like their organs were working better?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a big deal, and it really laid the groundwork for more research.
Okay, so we've got mice living longer,
Right.
which is interesting, but we're not mice.
True.
So how does Fisetin stack up against some of those other compounds that are always being talked about for being good for you, like quercetin and resveratrol?
Right. Those are always popping up.
Yeah.
Well, structurally, Fisetin is similar to those other polyphenols like quercetin and resveratrol.
So they're kind of in the same family?
Yeah, you could say that. They're all part of this bigger group of molecules that come from plants and that are known for their antioxidant properties and other, good stuff.
So are they all basically doing the same thing then?
Well, not necessarily. Some early research has actually suggested that Fisetin might be even better at that senolytic activity than some of those other compounds.
Oh, so even though they're similar,
Uh-huh.
Fisetin might be more effective.
Potentially, yeah. At least that's what some of the early research is hinting at, and that's why there's so much buzz around Fisetin, specifically in this area.
That's really interesting that even though they might have similar structures, they could be working differently in the body.
Yeah, that's a really important point to keep in mind. Just because two things look similar doesn't mean they're going to act the same way.
Right.
The body is complicated, and those tiny differences in their molecular makeup can really change how they interact with all the systems.
Now, one of the things I thought was super interesting about Fisetin was this idea of a hit-and-run approach.
Oh, yeah, the hit and run. That's a catchy one.
It does sound pretty cool, right?
It does.
So what's the thinking there?
Basically, the idea is that you might not need to take Fisetin all the time for it to work.
Okay.
So you could maybe take it in cycles, clear out a bunch of those senescent cells, and then your body could keep those levels down for a while without you needing to take more.
So you wouldn't have to be popping pills every day.
Right, exactly.
That'd be nice.
It would, and it kind of lines up with the whole idea behind senolytic therapy, which is more about periodic cleaning rather than trying to constantly suppress those cells.
But I have a feeling there's a but coming here.
Yeah. So while this hit and run strategy makes sense in theory, and it's even shown some promise in some of those preclinical studies,
Right.
we really got to be upfront about the fact that in humans, it's still mostly speculation.
Wow.
We just don't have a ton of clinical trial data to say for sure if it works that way in people.
So the science is still catching up to the idea?
It is, yeah. So it's definitely an exciting idea, but we need more research.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here.
Okay.
What do we actually know about how Fisetin works in humans?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because all those mouse studies are great, but we're not mice.
Right.
So we really have to balance the excitement with a dose of reality.
Okay.
And the reality is that right now we just don't have that solid clinical evidence to say for sure that Fisetin is effective in humans for any specific health outcome.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty big gap in our knowledge.
It is. And, it's one thing to see things happen in a lab or in animals.
Right.
But the human body is a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
There are so many factors that can influence how a compound behaves in us compared to a mouse.
So are there any human studies going on right now that might give us some answers?
There are, yeah. For instance, the Mayo Clinic has been doing some trials looking at Fisetin in older adults.
Okay.
Those are really important because they'll help us understand if it's actually beneficial, what the right dose might be, and if it's safe.
Okay.
But those trials take time,
Right.
and we're still waiting for the results. So for now, we really have to think of those potential benefits as hypotheses.
So not proven fact.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so another thing I read about Fisetin was that even if it does have these amazing benefits, it might be hard for our bodies to actually use it properly.
Yes, the bioavailability issue.
Yeah.
So basically, Fisetin isn't that easy for our bodies to absorb when we take it orally.
Okay.
It gets broken down and eliminated really quickly, which means that only a tiny bit of what you take actually gets into your bloodstream where it can have an effect.
So your body's just flushing it out.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's a big challenge because if your body can't even use it, then all those potential benefits don't really matter.
So scientists are working on that.
They are, yeah. They know this is a big hurdle, and they're trying to find ways to improve how our bodies absorb Fisetin.
Like what kind of things?
Well, there are a few different approaches. They're looking at liposomal delivery,
Okay.
which is basically where they package the Fisetin into tiny little fat-like particles that might help it get absorbed better.
Like a little Trojan horse.
Exactly.
Hey.
And they're also looking at using nanoparticles to encapsulate it.
Okay.
And then there's research into combining Fisetin with other compounds that might help to slow down its breakdown or boost its absorption.
So they're trying to make it stick around longer.
Right, give it a fighting chance.
Okay, that's good to know that they're trying to figure that part out.
Definitely.
Now, the review we were looking at didn't really say much about any potential risks with Fisetin.
Right.
Is that something we should be thinking about too?
Absolutely. I mean, in the amounts you'd normally get from food, like in fruits and veggies,
Right.
it's considered pretty safe.
Okay.
But some of the study, especially those animal studies that were looking at the senolytic effects,
Right.
they were using much higher doses than you'll get from diet alone.
Okay.
So like if you're taking a supplement,
Yeah.
it could be way more than you'd get from just eating strawberries or something.
Okay.
And we just don't know yet what the long-term effects of those high doses might be in humans.
So more research is needed?
Definitely. And we also don't know a lot about how the strategy might interact with medications.
Right.
Or if it could be a problem for people with certain health conditions. So it's really important to be cautious and not get ahead of ourselves.
So it's not a free-for-all just yet?
Not quite.
Okay, so to sum all this up for our listeners, what's the big takeaway from our deep dive into Fisetin?
Well, I think the review did a good job of highlighting both the potential and the unknowns.
Okay.
It's clear that there's a lot of excitement around Fisetin, especially when it comes to its potential as a senolytic compound.
Okay.
And those preclinical studies, they're really intriguing.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that our understanding of how it works in humans is still pretty limited.
Okay.
We need more research, particularly those good quality clinical trials, to really know for sure how effective and safe it is for people.
So exciting, but we need to be patient.
Exactly. I think a balanced and, cautiously optimistic outlook is the best way to approach this.
Well, this has been a super interesting conversation.
It has, yeah.
I feel like I've learned a lot.
It's a fascinating area of research, for sure, and it's changing so rapidly.
It is.
So it's important to stay informed.
And a big thank you to our listeners for bringing this topic to our attention.
Yes, thank you.
It's a great example of just how much there is to learn about aging and well-being.
It really is, and it shows how important it is to be critical and informed when you're reading about these kinds of compounds.
So thinking about everything we've talked about today, the promising findings from the lab and those animal studies,
Right.
but also that real need for more research in humans, it makes you wonder what kind of decisions people are making when they come across information about something like Fisetin.
Yeah.
How do we balance that excitement of new scientific discoveries with the need for solid evidence before we start changing our own health routines?
It's a tough question.
It is. It's something to think about for sure as we keep learning more about how science moves from the lab into our everyday lives.
Definitely food for thought.
It is.